It was close to 2 in the morning when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I was halfway between sleep and a strange dream about missing equipment reports, the kind of junk that sticks in your head after years in the National Guard. The ringtone was short, sharp, and didn't belong to anyone who usually called that late. I grabbed the phone, still groggy, and saw the name, Joanne. My younger sister. I answered, and all I heard was a broken whisper. Help. That one word shot me upright. I was instantly awake, no hesitation. I could hear her teeth chattering on the other end. Melissa, he left me. I was robbed. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. Where are you? My voice was steady, but my hands were already shaking with adrenaline. A gas station, Miller's Junction, off Route 89. My phone's almost dead. I'm so cold. I didn't waste another second. Stay where you are, don't move. I'm coming right now. Lack. I yanked on yesterday's jeans and a heavy hoodie, jammed my feet into boots, and grabbed the keys. By the time I hit the driver's seat, my training had already kicked in. Check the fuel gauge. Check the road conditions. I had 120 miles ahead of me, and a snowstorm that didn't give a damn about family drama. The roads were empty, just me and the occasional semi-truck. Headlights cut through the snow like knives through fog. I pushed the speed as much as the ice would allow, gripping the wheel tighter than I had in years. Every few miles, I checked the time and cursed. Joanne had never sounded so small. We used to fight like cats when we were younger about clothes, about boys, about who got the bigger slice of pizza. But this wasn't that girl anymore. This was my sister calling from the edge of panic, stranded in the cold because the one person she should have been able to trust had dumped her like trash. The GPS said 40 more miles. It felt like 400. I leaned forward over the wheel, like somehow that would get me there faster. The heating blasted, but sweat was still running down my back. I kept replaying her words in my head. I was robbed. I was abandoned. By who? Why? When I finally saw the glowing sign for Miller's Junction, I slowed just enough to make the turn. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a couple of trucks and a flickering neon sign that looked like it was one spark away from dying completely. Then I saw her. Joanne was curled up against the brick wall near the ice machine, wrapped in a thin jacket that was about as useful as tissue paper. Her hair was sticking out in every direction, and even from inside my truck, I could see her body shaking. I jumped out, the cold air slapping me in the face, and sprinted toward her. Joanne! That. Her head jerked up. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, eyes wide with raw fear. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the ground. God, Melissa, I didn't think you'd make it. Of course I made it, I said, pulling her close, trying to share whatever body heat I had. What the hell happened? She shook her head, tears freezing on her cheeks. Marcus, he took my keys. He said I wasn't welcome anymore. He left me here. I felt something snap in my chest. Her husband, the guy who was supposed to protect her, had thrown her out in the middle of the night in February, like she was some stranger he'd picked up off the street. I opened the passenger door of my truck and got her inside. Cranked the heat to max. She pressed her hands to the vents like she hadn't felt warmth in years. Are you hurt? I asked. Not physically. She hugged herself, still trembling. But, Melissa, he looked at me like he hated me, like I was nothing. I glanced at her, then back at the snowy road as I pulled out of the lot. The heater roared, but she was still shaking. I dug a blanket from the back seat and threw it over her. She curled into it like a child. We drove in silence for a while. The only sounds were the engine and her occasional sniffles. My brain was spinning. I've dealt with chaos before: supply shortages in a combat zone, convoy routes being ambushed, soldiers panicking under fire. But nothing had ever prepared me for the sight of my sister, abandoned by her own husband, sitting outside a gas station like discarded luggage. When we passed the halfway point, I noticed her fidgeting with her wedding ring. Joanne only did that when she was hiding something. Talk to me, I said. What aren't you telling me? She turned her face toward the window, watching the snow blur by. He found out about the money. That made my stomach tighten. What money? She hesitated, then whispered. Mom's inheritance, the land, the shares in the trucking company. It's worth almost $1 million. I nearly missed a turn. You've been sitting on that kind of money and never told me? I was going to use it for the Veterans Fund, she said quickly. You know, the one that helped you and your unit after Afghanistan. I wanted it to be a surprise. I gripped the wheel harder, processing. Joanne had hidden an entire inheritance, not from strangers, but from her husband and from me. No wonder Marcus had lost his mind when he stumbled across it. And when you told him? I asked. She covered her face with her hands. He screamed, said I was stealing his future. Then he grabbed my keys, shoved me out, and drove off. For a second, I thought about slamming the brakes and turning the truck around. March straight into their house, drag Marcus out by the collar, and teach him exactly what happens when you dump a woman in a snowstorm. But years in uniform had taught me one thing. Don't go in blind. Know the terrain, know the enemy, and plan the strike. I forced my breathing steady. Joanne was safe for now. That was the priority. The rest I'd deal with once she was warm, fed, and out of shock. She leaned against the seat, eyes half closed. Melissa, he's not going to stop. He said he'd ruin me. He said he'd make sure I lost everything. I didn't answer. Not yet. But inside, the same part of me that once managed convoys through minefields was already calculating. This wasn't just a family spat. This was war, and Marcus had just picked the wrong damn opponent. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, but inside my chest it felt like I was carrying a live grenade. The heater blasted hot air, the road stretched in front of us, and Joanne finally let herself sag against the seat, her face pale under the dim dashboard glow. Her voice was shaky but clear enough now. I didn't want you to find out like this. Mom left more than the farmhouse we sold. She had land in Vermont, stock in Midwestern freight, and bonds she'd been hiding since the 80s. I didn't know how to tell anyone. I thought if I kept it quiet, I could do something good with it. Moo. I shot her a quick glance. Good as in what? Her hands twisted the blanket. The Veterans Fund. The one you talked about all those years. I wanted to donate most of it there, quietly, no big announcement. Just help the people who came back broken and never got the support they deserved. I blinked at the windshield, snowflakes catching in the beams. On one level, I respected the hell out of that. On another, I couldn't believe she thought keeping it a secret was a smart idea. And you thought Marcus would be fine when he found out you'd erased his payday from the equation? I wasn't erasing anything. She shot back, a hint of fire in her voice now. It wasn't his, it was mine. Mom left it to me. He had no claim. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Joe, you're right about the law, but you've been married to the guy for years. People don't always care what's legal when they think they've been cheated. She pulled the blanket closer and stared out into the dark. I thought maybe he'd understand if he knew it was for the veterans. He pretended to listen, then he just snapped. Said I was selfish. Said I cared more about strangers than my own family. He took my purse, grabbed the car keys, and left me standing in the driveway. The knot in my stomach turned to stone. He robbed you? He took everything. Cash, cards, even my phone charger. He left me the phone so I could figure it out on my own. I shook my head. That man's not just selfish. He's dangerous. And dumping you 120 miles away in the middle of February? That's attempted homicide by frostbite. She tried to laugh, but it came out more like a sob. When he drove off, he just glared at me like I was some kind of thief. I couldn't believe it. Like I was stealing from his future. I focused back on the road, jaw locked. I'd seen betrayal in combat, but betrayal in your own living room cut deeper. The truck rumbled over the frozen pavement, and every mile I drove, the more I wanted to break something or someone. She sniffled. I kept thinking about calling the cops, but what would I even say? That my husband tossed me out in the snow because I wouldn't let him gamble away my inheritance? I almost slammed my fist into the steering wheel. Yes, that's exactly what you should say. But don't worry, I'll handle that conversation when the time comes. Joanne turned her head, studying me. You're serious, aren't you? You'd really step into this? You're my sister, I said flatly. I've spent half my career protecting strangers in deserts halfway across the world. You think I'm going to sit here and let some con man treat my own blood like a doormat? She let out a shaky breath and stared at her ring again. I'm scared, Melissa. He said if I didn't back down, he'd take me to court. He knows lawyers. He said hiding assets is fraud. That made me laugh. Sharp and humorless. Marcus, the guy who can't even keep a job, suddenly an expert on financial law? Please. The only thing he knows about fraud is first-hand experience. Her eyes flicked to mine, a mix of fear and hope. You think he's bluffing? I think he's desperate. And desperate men always overplay their hand. The miles crawled by, but the air in the truck felt heavier than the storm outside. Joanne leaned her head against the window. Her reflection looked older than she really was, like one night had carved years into her face. I cleared my throat. So he found the paperwork. How? He was helping me sort old boxes for tax season. I should have known better. He saw the deed, the appraisal papers. I tried to explain, but once he realized how much it was worth, he exploded. Figures, I muttered. Guy wouldn't recognize loyalty if it smacked him in the face, but he can sniff out dollar signs like a bloodhound. That. Joanne hugged her blanket tighter. I wanted it to be a gift, Melissa. A surprise that meant something. Now it's a curse. I slowed for a red light in a deserted intersection. The glow washed over the truck, painting her face tired and hollow. It's not a curse. It's just money. But Marcus? He's the curse. And the good news about curses is they can be broken. She didn't respond, but for the first time that night, a flicker of relief crossed her face. The rest of the drive was quiet. My brain was already breaking the problem down the way I'd break down a logistics mission. Identify resources, map the terrain, anticipate threats, and plan contingencies. Except this wasn't about moving supplies to a forward base. This was about defending my sister from the man who vowed to love her and instead treated her like an obstacle to cash in on. When we finally pulled into my driveway, the house lights glowed like a beacon. I helped Joanne inside, sat her on the couch, and shoved a mug of coffee into her trembling hands. She sipped it like it was medicine. I dropped into the armchair across from her. We'll get you warm. Then we'll figure out our next move. She nodded, eyes red but steady. Melissa, if he really takes me to court, I could lose everything. He said he'd make sure I walk away with nothing. Not even the trust fund I wanted for the hospital. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Let him try. He wants a war? He just picked one with someone who's been trained for it. The mug rattled in her hands as she set it down on the table. I don't know if I can do this alone. You're not alone, I said. Not anymore. The coffee in her mug had gone cold, but Joanne still held it like it was keeping her alive. I'd spent enough nights in briefing rooms to recognize the look. She wasn't just exhausted. She was bracing for something worse. Her voice cracked as she finally said it. Melissa, he told me he's going to sue me. He said hiding the inheritance is fraud, that he can prove I cheated him out of marital property. I leaned back, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course he did. Classic scare tactic. Throw big words around, make you panic, hope you'll cave. It's the kind of playbook a loser thinks is genius. Her hands shook as she set the mug down. But what if he's right? What if he drags me into court? I don't have money for lawyers. He said he'd take everything, even what Mom left me. He said judges don't like liars. I stood up, pacing. Judges also don't like deadbeats with gambling habits. He's bluffing, Joe. And even if he's dumb enough to file, he'll have to open his own books. Trust me, that's not a road he wants to walk down. She chewed her lip, the way she always did when she was holding back. I stopped pacing and looked at her. There's more. Spit it out. Her eyes filled again. He said, I wasn't just selfish. He said I was dangerous. That I was willing to throw away his future and his daughter's future for strangers. He made it sound like I was some criminal. I laughed, short and sharp. That's rich. Mark is calling someone else dangerous. The guy couldn't spell integrity if you spotted him the vowels. She tried to smile, but it didn't last. He meant it, Melissa. He looked me in the eye and said he'd destroy me in court. He said he had proof. That word sat in the air like smoke. Proof. I dropped into the chair again. Proof of what? That you didn't run to him waving your mother's paperwork the day she died? That you wanted to donate money to a cause instead of his bookie? What's he going to show a judge his DraftKings account? Her shoulders slumped. He said he has texts, emails, that he can show I lied to him for years. Did you? She blinked at me. What? Did you lie to him? Did you ever tell him there wasn't more inheritance when you knew there was? She looked down, twisting her ring again. I avoided it. I said Mom's estate was complicated, that the farmhouse was the main thing. I didn't tell him about the rest. I exhaled through my teeth. That's not fraud. That's called keeping control of your own damn property. He wants to play lawyer? Fine. But he's not going to like Discovery when it drags out his financial mess. Iced it. The word mess seemed to sink into her. She stared at the table, tracing circles in the condensation from her mug. You think he's hiding things too? I don't think, Joe. I know. She looked up at me like I'd just offered her oxygen. How? Because I've seen this before. Guys who shout the loudest about being wronged usually have the most to hide. It's like in the Guard, every soldier who whined about being accused of cutting corners was always the guy who forgot to file his reports. Marcus is no different. Her laugh was bitter. So what? He's bluffing. He's desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. She rubbed her temples. Melissa, I don't think you understand how angry he was. He told me if I fought him, he'd drag my name through the mud. He said he'd make me look like a greedy liar in front of everyone. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Then let him try. You think the neighbors are going to believe his sob story when the repo man's been circling his driveway for months? You think a judge will side with a guy who can't keep a job because he keeps cooking the books? Joe, the only mud he's got is the kind he's already standing in. Her face softened a little, but the fear didn't vanish. I can't do this, Melissa. I don't have your backbone. I'm not a fighter. I shook my head. Don't sell yourself short. You've been putting up with his crap for years. That's tougher than half the training I ever went through. And lucky for you, you don't have to fight him alone anymore. Silence hung between us. I could see the weight on her, the way betrayal had gutted her. In Afghanistan, when supply lines broke and morale tanked, we always told each other, stay calm, stick to the plan, survive the night. That's exactly what I needed Joanne to understand now. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She jumped, nearly spilling what was left of her coffee. The screen lit up with a name, Marcus. Don't answer, I said immediately. She stared at it like it might explode. It buzzed again, then again. Finally it went dark. She let out a long breath she'd been holding. He's not going to stop, she whispered. He's going to keep coming until he gets what he wants. I leaned back, folding my arms. Then we make sure he never gets it. You've spent too long reacting. Now we go on offense. I tagged. Joanne looked at me like she didn't quite believe I was serious. But she'd seen that look in my eyes before, the same look I had before a convoy, before a supply run into hostile territory. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The storm outside pounded against the windows, wind howling like it wanted in. Inside, the air felt thick with something new, not just fear anymore, but the first spark of resolve. I stood up and pulled my notebook off the counter. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to write down every detail you remember, what he took, what he said, every threat. Don't leave anything out. Meanwhile, I'm going to start checking his trail. If he wants to drag this into the light, fine. Let's see how much sunlight he can handle. Joanne looked down at her hands, then back at me. Her voice was soft but steady. You really think we can beat him? I met her eyes without flinching. No, I don't think. I know. Adair. I opened the notebook and started jotting down names, dates, and the details Joanne spilled out like broken glass. She described the threats, the way Marcus had twisted his face in rage, and every word he'd spat about taking her to court. I wrote it all, my pen moving fast, the same way I'd take notes during intel briefings. When she finally slumped back into the couch, I took a deep breath. All right, now it's my turn. I pulled my laptop onto the table, flipped it open, and started digging. Military life teaches you a lot about how to track people using open source records. It's not about secret access. It's about knowing where to look. People leave a trail. Marcus was no exception. Joanne hugged the blanket tighter. Melissa, what are you even looking for? The truth. And trust me, he's left fingerprints all over it. Within minutes, I had his employment history pulled up from a public search. Marcus hadn't just quit his last job at a Denver logistics firm, he'd been terminated. Reason: financial irregularities under investigation. I let out a low whistle. Well, look who got himself kicked out of the candy store. Joanne leaned forward, eyes wide. What does that mean? It means your husband's a thief. He was skimming or cooking books and they tossed him before calling the cops. My bet? He cut a deal to leave quietly. She covered her mouth. He never told me. He just said the company downsized. I clicked through more entries, chasing breadcrumbs, payday loans, 2 different companies, both with active collection notices. A string of gambling transactions on DraftKings, FanDuel, and some sketchy offshore sites. Each one like a neon sign screaming addiction. Jesus, Joe. He's not just broke. He's underwater. I'm surprised the man hasn't started selling plasma. Her face went pale. He kept telling me he was looking for work, that it was just a rough patch. I believed him. I thought maybe he was stressed about bills. I spun the laptop so she could see the screen. This isn't stress. This is a pattern. He's been living like a parasite, waiting for your inheritance to bail him out. And when he realized you weren't handing it over, he snapped. She shook her head slowly. I can't believe I didn't see it. All the late nights, the excuses, the lies. I just thought he was ashamed. I thought if I gave him space, he'd come clean. Guys like Marcus don't come clean, I said flatly. They dig deeper, and when they hit bottom, they drag everyone else down with them. Her hands trembled as she rubbed her forehead. So he's not just angry. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous. I nodded. Exactly. And desperate men make mistakes. That's where we'll get him. I dug further, cross-referencing his name with court records. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through a case from 3 years earlier. A sealed arbitration agreement with his former employer. Terms undisclosed. Translation: Marcus screwed up badly enough to cost the company money, and they paid him to vanish quietly. Son of a bitch, I muttered. He's been running this scam for years. Joanne's eyes watered again. He always made me feel like I was the irresponsible one, like I was the reason we never got ahead. And all this time, he was bleeding us dry behind my back. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. He manipulated you. That's what cons do. But he can't hide from a paper trail. She sniffled, pulling herself together. So what now? What do we do with this? We use it. He wants to threaten court? Perfect. We'll walk in with receipts. Judges don't like liars, remember? Let's see how much he enjoys explaining payday loans and missing corporate funds under oath. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. You make it sound like a battle plan. That's because it is, I said, tapping the notebook. Rule 1. Know your enemy. And I'm starting to know Marcus better than he knows himself. I clicked another tab, this time pulling up property records. No surprise his name was tied to nothing of value. No house, no land, no investments. He had less to his name than a 20-year-old private straight out of boot camp. Look at this, I said, tilting the screen toward her. He's been banking everything on you. Without your inheritance, he's got nothing. That's why he's panicking. Joanne swallowed hard. And that's why he dumped me at that gas station. Exactly. He wanted to scare you, break you, so you'd fold. It's the same tactic bullies use when they're cornered. But he underestimated one thing. She tilted her head. What's that? I smirked. Me. That earned a small laugh, the first real one of the night. It was brittle, but it was there. I closed the laptop with a snap. All right, we've got enough to put him on defense. Next step is documenting every cent, every receipt, every threat. If he tries to play this game, we bury him in his own lies. Joanne leaned back into the couch, still pale but steadier now. I don't know how you do it. You make it sound like he doesn't stand a chance. That's because he doesn't, I said. Marcus thinks this is just some family squabble. He doesn't realize he picked a fight with someone trained to plan logistics in a war zone. He's bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. She laughed again, shaking her head. I wish I had your confidence. You will, I told her. Once you see him crumble under the weight of his own mess, you'll know. The clock ticked past 4 a.m. The storm outside finally starting to ease. Joanne pulled the blanket tighter, her eyelids heavy, but she fought sleep like a soldier afraid of letting her guard down. Rest, I said softly. I've got this. Just rest. She hesitated, then finally let her head drop against the pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. I stayed awake, staring at the laptop closed on the table, my mind running through strategies. Every file, every debt, every scam Marcus had pulled was fuel. And if he wanted a war over Joanne's inheritance, then I'd be the one drawing the battle lines. The hum of the heater filled the silence, steady and low, as I kept writing in the notebook names, numbers, patterns. A soldier's kind of map. Only this time the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was right here in our own family. I woke to the sound of Joanne's phone buzzing across the coffee table, the harsh vibration cutting through the thin quiet of the early morning. She stirred under the blanket, still groggy, and reached for it. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Her face went pale as she answered. "Hello?" I watched her lips tighten while she listened. Then her hand started to shake. She pulled the phone away and put it on speaker. A male voice snarled through static, sharp, and menacing. "Tell Marcus his clock's run out. He owes, and if he doesn't pay, we don't care who answers the door." Joanne's breath hitched. "Who is this?" "You've got the wrong number." The voice laughed, low and bitter. "No, sweetheart, I've got the right number. You're his wife. That makes you collateral." Then the line went dead. Her hand dropped into her lap, knuckles white. "Melissa? What the hell was that?" I snatched the phone and redialed. Straight to voicemail. "That," I said firmly, was confirmation. Marcus isn't just broke, he's in deep with people who don't send polite reminders. She buried her face in her hands. "I can't believe this is happening. They're calling me now. They know my number." "Of course they do," I muttered, pacing the room. "If he gave your info on a payday loan or used your name as reference, you're on their radar. And now they're using you as leverage." The room felt colder, the kind of cold that seeps past your skin and into your chest. This wasn't just a messy marriage anymore. It was a threat, and threats needed answers. I grabbed the notebook from the table and jotted down the number. "We'll trace it. I know some people who can help me track this down." Joanne looked up, tears brimming. "Melissa, I don't want you getting dragged into this." "Dragged in?" I snapped. "He left you stranded at a gas station in the snow. You think I'm going to sit back while strangers threaten you in your own home?" She flinched, then nodded quietly. I softened my tone. "We're not victims here, Joe. We're going to turn this around, but you need to be ready for what we might find." Her shoulders slumped. "I don't know how much more I can take." "You'll take it," I said, "because you've got me. And I've seen worse than some back alley loan sharks." The words weren't just for her, they were for me too. I'd spent years in places where fear was currency, where people folded under pressure because they didn't believe they could fight back. I wasn't about to let my sister fold. By mid-morning, I had 3 missed calls from the same number. Each left a voicemail, each uglier than the last. Promises to visit, threats about breaking what Marcus can't pay, and one particularly colorful warning about fire. Joanne sat hunched on the couch, arms wrapped around herself. "If they come here..." "They won't," I cut her off. "Not unless they want to meet a woman who can clear a room in 15 seconds flat." She cracked the smallest smile, shaky but real. "You sound just like Dad when he used to chase off the high school punks." "Yeah, but Dad didn't have military training and a Glock in her duffel bag." Her eyes widened. "You brought your service pistol?" "Of course I did," I said deadpan. "You think I drive cross-state at midnight unarmed? Come on." That earned me another weak laugh, which was exactly what I needed her to do. But humor aside, the situation was serious. Marcus hadn't just failed his marriage, he'd entangled Joanne in debts tied to men who thrived on fear. And now, their spotlight was on her. I started a list in my notebook. Marcus's employers, payday loan companies, online gambling accounts. The goal was to map his entire mess. When you know the terrain, you know where to strike. Joanne finally broke the silence. "What if Marcus drags me into court? What if he says I was hiding money?" I shook my head. "That's his fantasy. Courts run on evidence, not tantrums. You've got the deeds, the paperwork, and you've got me. He's the one hiding crimes, not you." She exhaled slowly, as if that reassurance gave her the air she hadn't realized she was holding. The doorbell rang then, sharp and unexpected. Both of us froze. I moved first, motioning for her to stay put. I peered through the window. A man in a cheap jacket, holding a clipboard. His car idled on the curb with no company logo, just rust and dents. "Debt collector." I opened the door but stepped halfway out, blocking his view inside. "Help you?" He gave me a plastic smile. "I'm looking for Joanne Miller. She's listed on paperwork tied to Marcus Miller. He's behind on a repayment schedule, and we're authorized to..." "Stop right there," I said flatly. "You're not authorized to do jack on this porch. You want Joanne? You call her lawyer? You set a court date? You don't show up at her door making threats." The smile slipped. Ma'am, I think you misunderstand how this works. No, I snapped, stepping closer. I understand perfectly. You're here to scare her into paying debts that aren't hers. But here's what you don't understand, she's got me. And I don't scare. His eyes flicked to the military dog tags at my neck, then back to my face. The smile was gone now, replaced by irritation. I'll make a note of this visit. You do that, I said, shutting the door in his face. Joanne rushed over, whispering urgently. Melissa, you can't just… What if they come back? Let them, I said, locking the deadbolt. Next time I'll have my phone recording and they'll be on YouTube before they hit the sidewalk. Her laugh burst out before she could stop it. You're insane. Insane works, I grinned. But once she sat back down, her hands were trembling again. I crouched beside her. Listen, this isn't just Marcus's mess anymore, it's our fight. And if they think we're easy targets, they're about to find out they picked the wrong family. She nodded slowly, determination starting to edge past the fear. Okay, then what's the plan? I tapped the notebook. Step 1, gather proof. Step 2, build leverage. Step 3, hit Marcus where it hurts. If we do it right, he'll be the one begging for mercy. The faintest spark lit in her eyes. Family revenge stories don't usually have happy endings, do they? Only when the family fights back, I said. The phone buzzed again, another unknown number flashing across the screen. Joanne reached for it but hesitated. I grabbed it instead, letting it ring until it cut off. They're trying to rattle us, I said. But rattling isn't the same as winning. She nodded, pulling the blanket around her like armor. Outside, the rusted car was still idling at the curb, engine humming like a warning. I stood at the window, arms crossed, watching it until it finally drove off. Every instinct screamed this was only the beginning. And if Marcus thought he could hide behind creditors and half-baked legal threats, he was about to learn what it meant when someone like me decided the fight was personal. I drove Joanne across town the next afternoon, her eyes fixed on the passenger window, jaw tight as we pulled up in front of Marcus's rental. His beat-up pickup sat in the driveway, parked crooked, beer cans glinting in the bed. The place already reeked of neglect, overgrown grass, paint peeling, blinds half broken. It was the kind of house that told the truth about its owner long before he opened his mouth. Joanne's hand tightened on her seatbelt. What if he goes crazy again? Then he'll learn why I was trained to de-escalate and, if necessary, finish fights quickly, I said, pushing open my door. She didn't smile. I didn't expect her to. Marcus swung the door open before we even knocked. His smirk spread instantly, the kind of grin that made you want to wash your hands after seeing it. Well, look who finally grew a backbone. My runaway wife and her babysitter soldier. Joanne flinched, but I stepped forward, blocking his view of her. Cut the crap, Marcus, we need to talk. He leaned against the frame like he owned the whole block. Sure, let's talk. Inside. Unless you'd rather air our dirty laundry in front of the neighbors. I didn't like it, but we stepped in. The place smelled of stale smoke and fried food. Papers covered the coffee table, half-empty envelopes, legal documents, a draft of what looked like a lawsuit. Joanne froze. You actually went through with it? Marcus grinned, waving a stapled packet. Drafted and ready to file. Fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Sounds official, doesn't it? You think a judge won't take one look at your hidden money and hand me half? I kept my voice even. You might want to be careful, Marcus. Courts dig deep. They'll pull employment records, bank statements, restitution agreements. You sure you want them looking at yours? His grin faltered for a half-second, then snapped back. I don't know what you think you found, soldier girl, but I've got rights. Joanne can't just throw me away like some piece of garbage. Garbage doesn't threaten women at gas stations, I said. Garbage doesn't sick debt collectors on family members. Garbage knows it belongs in a can. You, on the other hand, are trying to act like you've got leverage when you've got nothing but overdue bills. Howard. His eyes narrowed. You think you know everything. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I know you were fired for cooking numbers at your last job. I know you've got payday loan companies breathing down your neck. I know about the gambling sites, the restitution payments, the arbitration you signed so your old company wouldn't drag your name through court. You want to test me, Marcus? File that lawsuit. Let's see who comes out of discovery still standing. End quote. The color drained from his face before he masked it with anger. You've been digging into me? Call it recon, I said. And I've got enough to sink you before you even get to trial. Joanne finally found her voice. Marcus, how could you? All this time you made me believe I was the problem. You said we were broke because of me, because I wasn't giving you access. But you're the one who's been lying. He sneered, turning on her. Don't play innocent, Joanne. You hid money. You kept secrets. You think you're better than me? She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. I never lied to destroy my family. Marcus slammed his fist on the table, rattling the coffee cups. You owe me. I've carried you for years. No, I cut him off. You carried her into debt. Big difference. His eyes locked on me, jaw clenching. You don't get to come in here and act like some hero. This is between me and my wife. Wrong, I said, calm but sharp. The second you abandoned her in the cold and let thugs call her phone, it became my business. And trust me, Marcus, you don't want me in your business. For the first time since we walked in, he sat back, silent, chewing on his rage. Joanne straightened a little, her voice steadier. I want you out of my life, out of my house, out of everything. You're not going to touch a cent of my inheritance. Marcus laughed, harsh and forced. You think you can just erase me? You think you've got the guts? She lifted her chin. I have my sister. The words hit harder than I expected. Her voice, fragile just hours ago, carried a steel edge now. She wasn't hiding behind me, she was standing with me. Marcus sneered again, trying to regain ground. You'll regret this. Courts, creditors, they'll tear you apart. And when they do, don't come crying back. I leaned in close, my voice low enough that only he heard. If you push her again, Marcus, I'll make sure every one of your debt collectors has copies of your employment records, gambling accounts, and that arbitration deal. They'll eat you alive before you ever step foot in court. His lip curled, but he didn't speak. I straightened, motioning to Joanne. We're done here. She moved toward the door, her back stiff but unbroken. Marcus didn't follow. He just sat, glaring, his hands gripping the lawsuit draft until the paper crumpled in his fists. Once outside, Joanne let out a shaky breath. Melissa, I've never seen him like that. You scared him. That was the point, I said, guiding her to the truck. He needed to know he's not in control anymore. She slid into the seat, still trembling but lighter somehow, as if the weight of his manipulation had finally started to lift. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and checked the mirrors. For a moment, Marcus's silhouette lingered in the window, watching us leave like a man who'd just realized his empire was crumbling. Joanne whispered, almost to herself, I'm not afraid of him anymore. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Good, because the real fight is only beginning. And this time, we're the ones holding the high ground. The road stretched out ahead, clear and cold. But for the first time in days, the air inside the truck felt a little less heavy. The drive back home felt like silence was glued to the windows. Joanne leaned her head against the glass, watching the snowy suburbs slide past. But her eyes weren't seeing houses, they were replaying every word Marcus had thrown at her. I knew that look. I'd seen it before, though not on her face. I'd seen it on soldiers sitting in the dust of a blown-out village, faces hollow from betrayal. I gripped the wheel tighter, jaw locked. My head went somewhere else, to a night 12 years ago, halfway around the world, Afghanistan. The air had been thick with sand, our outpost lit only by the dull glow of chem lights. I remembered the crack of gunfire, the shouting, the way trust shattered when one of our Afghan partners turned his rifle on us mid-patrol. 2 men in my unit went down before we neutralized him. The sting of betrayal had never left me. Now, watching Joanne's reflection in the glass, I realized the same poison was eating her alive. Different battlefield, same enemy, betrayal from someone who pretended to care. I broke the silence. You know what Marcus reminds me of? A turncoat. Smiles in your face while his hand's already reaching for the knife in your back. Her head turned slowly, eyes rimmed red. Melissa, he was my husband. I trusted him with everything. I thought he loved me. He loved your inheritance, I said bluntly. That's it. Men like him don't feel love, Joe. They feel hunger. And when they run out of scraps, they bite the hand that fed them. She swallowed hard, hugging herself. I don't know how I'll ever trust again. I softened, loosening my grip on the wheel. That's not true. You trusted me enough to call when he threw you out. That means something. Trust isn't gone, it's just under attack. And we don't let the enemy win. How? Her lips twitched, a flicker of a smile. You sound like you're still in uniform. I shrugged. Some wars never end. They just change locations. The rest of the drive passed with fewer words. By the time we pulled into her driveway, dusk had settled like a gray blanket over the neighborhood. The house looked small and worn, but at least it was hers, and it was safe for now. Inside, I dropped my duffel near the couch and started a fire in the old brick fireplace. Joanne sat at the table, shoulders hunched, staring at her wedding ring. She twisted it off and set it down, the tiny band clicking against the wood. That's done, she whispered. I sat across from her. Good. Now let's talk about what comes next. Her eyes flicked up. What if he fights me? What if he really does take this to court? Then we bury him with his own lies, I said, pulling the notebook back out. Marcus isn't a mystery anymore. He's a pattern of bad choices, with a criminal record waiting to be unsealed. He can't win in court unless you roll over. She nodded slowly, still staring at the ring. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. The fire crackled, throwing warm light across the room. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. I need you to remember something. You are not weak. You've been carrying his weight for years while he lied and gambled and threatened you. That takes strength, Joe. More than you give yourself credit for. Her voice cracked. Then why do I feel so broken? I reached across and gripped her hand. Because betrayal hits like shrapnel. It cuts deep, even when you survive the blast. But broken doesn't mean finished. It just means you've got scars. And scars mean you lived through hell and kept walking. For a long moment, we sat in the glow of the fire, the air thick with everything unspoken. Finally, she whispered, Melissa, I need to know something. If this gets worse, if he doesn't stop, will you really stand with me? I didn't hesitate. I stood with brothers in combat who'd only known me for 6 months. You're my sister. I've known you my whole life. There's nothing on earth that could make me leave you standing alone. Her shoulders shook, tears spilling. But this time it wasn't the broken sob of fear, it was release. She leaned across the table and hugged me hard, clutching like she finally believed she wasn't abandoned. I hugged her back, whispering into her hair. He won't win, not while I'm breathing. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet but clear. For the first time since this mess started, I saw something in her that looked like resolve. She wiped her cheeks, her voice steadier. Then let's fight him. Let's make sure he never hurts me or anyone again. I smirked. That's the spirit. Welcome to the war room. She actually laughed at that, shaking her head. Only you would call divorce a war. It is when the other side plays dirty, I said, and Marcus plays filthy. I leaned back, letting the warmth from the fire sink into my bones. The memory of Afghanistan still lingered, faces, dust, betrayal, but it no longer felt like just a ghost. It felt like training. Like every scar had prepared me for this exact fight. Joanne picked up the ring one last time, studied it under the firelight, then dropped it into the flames. The gold hissed and cracked as it sank into the coals. I didn't say a word. She didn't need permission. That was her victory, small but real. She turned back to me, her face calmer than I'd seen in days. So, what's the next move, Captain? Next move, I said, grabbing the notebook again, is turning all of Marcus's skeletons into weapons. We'll make him wish he never tried this. End duel. Her eyes glinted, no longer just sad, but sharp. Then let's get to work. The fire roared higher as the wind outside howled, but inside that little house, something shifted. Joanne wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ready to fight. And that meant Marcus had already lost half the battle. I spread the papers across Joanne's kitchen table like a field map, each line of debt and every note of misconduct its own piece of terrain. She sat beside me, still red-eyed but sharper now, a pen clutched in her hand like a weapon. All right, I said, tapping the stack of printouts. We've got employment records, payday loans, gambling receipts, arbitration agreements. This isn't a rumor, it's a dossier. And if Marcus drags you to court, this will tear him apart. She nodded, biting her lip. What about the threats? The phone calls? I pulled out my own phone and opened the recordings I'd started saving. Each voicemail, full of snarls and thinly veiled warnings, was another bullet in our chamber. I hit play on one, the collector's voice filling the room. Tell Marcus he's out of time. If he doesn't pay, the fire comes to you. Joanne shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. How can someone just say that? Like it's normal? Because to them it is, I said bluntly. Fear is their business model. But now we've got it on record. And the second Marcus tries to make himself look like a victim, we drop this on the table. Judges love evidence. Threats, gambling, fraud, that's the trifecta of self-destruction. She leaned closer, scanning one of the bank statements. Melissa, what's this line? Cash transfer? $3,000? I traced the entry with my finger. Good catch. He wired money to Western Asset Recovery. Not a bank. That's one of those third-tier collectors. They buy bad debt for pennies on the dollar. If he's paying them, it means his credit is radioactive. Her jaw dropped. And he still had the nerve to accuse me of being irresponsible? Projection, I muttered, scribbling in the notebook. Liars always accuse others of the thing they're guilty of. It's how they survive until someone calls their bluff. I flipped open another folder I'd pulled from online court databases. Here, Marcus Miller versus Axiom Tech, Denver County. Arbitration sealed. But look, this footnote? Restitution paid in monthly installments, $60,000. He's still paying it down. Joanne's hand flew to her mouth. $60,000? He told me he left because the company was toxic, that they didn't appreciate him. Companies don't pay you to leave because they don't appreciate you, I said dryly. They pay you to shut up after you've been caught with your hand in the till. The pen snapped in her grip, ink bleeding into her fingers. I wasted years on this man. Years. I slid a napkin across the table. You didn't waste them. You survived them. Big difference. Now it's time to make those years mean something by making sure he never does this again. She exhaled sharply, gripping the napkin like it was a lifeline. So how do we use this? What's the actual plan? Step 1, I said, flipping to a clean page in the notebook. We line up all the evidence in a timeline, show a clear pattern of fraud, gambling, debt. Step 2, we take copies to an attorney, someone who knows family law cold. Step 3, we confront him again, but this time on our terms, with the lawyer backing you. That way, he can't spin this as just a domestic spat. He'll see it's war, and he'll know he's losing. Her eyes narrowed. And if he refuses to back down? Then we push him into a corner. We've got creditors, court documents, even criminal behavior. You don't negotiate with a man like Marcus. You corner him until surrender looks like his only option. Joanne's lips curved into a grim smile. Sounds military. That's because it is, I said, grinning. Different battlefield, same tactics. Identify weakness, exploit it, win before the fight even starts. She sat back, rubbing the ink from her fingers. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to know what it's like to be powerless. I leaned across the table. He will. Because men like Marcus only understand one thing, losing. And we're about to give him a masterclass. I spent the next 2 hours scanning, copying, and organizing every scrap of data into labeled folders. Joanne watched, occasionally pointing out details I'd missed, dates he'd claimed to be working late, but were actually tied to gambling transactions. Weekends he swore he was visiting friends, but lined up with massive ATM withdrawals near casinos. The more she saw, the straighter she. Saturday. By the time the folders were stacked neatly on the table, she looked less like a victim and more like a plaintiff preparing for trial. Melissa, she said finally, voice steady, do you think I can actually win? I smirked, tucking the last document into place. Jo, we don't just win, we annihilate. She laughed, quick and sharp, surprising both of us. God, I needed to hear that. I leaned back, stretching my arms. Think of it this way. You spent years playing defense while Marcus ran a fence with lies. Now we flip the script. He's the one scrambling. Her gaze drifted to the fireplace where her wedding ring had melted into the ashes. Then let him scramble. I'm done playing his game. The phone buzzed again, another unknown number flashing across the screen. Joanne tensed, but I picked it up, hit record, and answered. This is Captain Turner, I said crisply. A pause. Then the same gravelly voice from before. Marcus has until Friday. No payment, and things get ugly. Listen carefully, I said, voice cold as steel. If you or anyone you know comes near my sister again, you won't be dealing with Marcus. You'll be dealing with me. And trust me, you don't want that. The line clicked dead. Joanne stared at me, stunned. Melissa, was that safe? Safe? I shrugged. No. Effective? Absolutely. She covered her face, half laughing, half horrified. You're insane. Maybe, I admitted, jotting down the timestamp in the notebook. But insanity wins wars. For the first time, she didn't argue. By evening, the folders were packed neatly into a box labeled Marcus Evidence. Joanne traced the marker letters with her fingertips, then looked at me. Melissa, thank you for not letting me drown in this. I met her gaze, steady. That's what sisters are for. You don't leave family behind. Not in combat, not at home. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and the faint sting of ink from our long day's work. Joanne leaned back in her chair, tired but stronger, like a soldier who'd finally found her footing in the middle of chaos. The box sat between us, full of Marcus's sins, and I knew the next time we opened it, we'd use every page to bring him down. The storm clouds rolled in just as night settled over Joanne's house, the kind of winter sky that pressed low and heavy, like it was daring you to step outside. I double-checked the locks on every door, tightened the windows, and set my duffel by the couch with the pistol case tucked neatly inside. Joanne watched me from the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. You always prepare like this? She asked quietly. I shrugged, running a fingertip along the deadbolt. Habit. Overseas, you never slept without knowing your perimeter. Here, different enemy, same principle. She tried to smile, but it didn't stick. Marcus won't come tonight, will he? Not Marcus, I said, pulling the curtain shut. But men he owes? That's another story. Her eyes widened. Melissa. Before she could finish, her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number again. She reached for it, but I was faster, flipping it open and pressing record. Hello? I said. A voice sneered through the static. Tell Marcus time's up. If he can't pay, maybe we settle with his pretty wife instead. I leaned into the receiver, voice steady. You make one more call to this number. You'll be explaining yourself to law enforcement. And if you show up here, let's just say you won't like who answers the door. The line went dead. Joanne's mug clattered against the table. They know I'm here, Melissa. What if they really... They won't. I cut her off. And if they do, they'll regret it. I set the phone down, then pulled my chair closer to hers. Listen, Jo, tomorrow we confront Marcus with everything. But tonight, you need to breathe. Fear makes you sloppy, and sloppy doesn't win. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how you stay so calm. I gave her a half smile. You didn't see me the first time mortars landed on our FOB. My hands shook so hard I could barely reload. Calm isn't natural, it's practice. And you're about to get plenty of it. She managed a small laugh. You always did know how to make crazy sound normal. The clock ticked toward midnight. Joanne finally went upstairs, but I stayed in the living room, notebook open, lamp low. I went through every page of evidence again. Marcus's loans, his gambling records, the arbitration, the threats. The pattern was clear, damning, and airtight. But in the back of my head, a darker thought crept in. Marcus wasn't just desperate. He was reckless. And reckless men didn't always wait for courts to decide their fate. The wind rattled the window just as headlights flashed across the front yard. My chest tightened. I killed the lamp and crouched near the curtain, peeking outside. A black sedan idled at the curb. No logo, no plates I could make out. The engine hummed low, steady. I slipped the pistol out of its case and kept it at my side. The car sat there for a full minute before pulling away, disappearing down the street. Joanne's footsteps pounded down the stairs. What happened? I saw lights. I holstered the pistol. Nothing, just someone turning around. It was a lie, but a useful one. She didn't need more nightmares tonight. She stared at me, eyes narrowing. You'd tell me if it wasn't nothing, right? I paused, then nodded. If it mattered. That. Her shoulders eased slightly, though I could tell she didn't quite believe me. She went back upstairs, and I returned to the couch. The house settled into uneasy quiet, the fire spitting occasional sparks. I thought about Afghanistan again, about the long nights before a mission, the nerves, the waiting, the gnawing in your gut that never quite went away until you stepped into action. Tonight felt the same. Around 3 a.m., the phone buzzed again. I let it ring. Whoever it was, they could stew in their own bile. By then, Joanne was finally asleep upstairs, her breathing steady enough that I could hear it faintly from below. I wrote one last line in the notebook before shutting it. Tomorrow, Marcus sees the battlefield for what it island, and he won't like the terrain. I set the notebook on the table, leaned back against the couch, and let my eyes close for a moment, listening to the fire crackle and the wind press against the walls. Sleep wouldn't come easy, but I didn't need easy. I just needed enough to face the storm head-on when the sun came up. And for the first time in weeks, Joanne wasn't the one keeping watch over her life. I was. Morning light cut across the snow, harsh and white, as Joanne and I pulled into the parking lot of her attorney's office. Neutral ground. Not Marcus's house, not hers. Somewhere public enough to keep him from exploding, private enough to lay everything out without an audience. She smoothed her coat nervously, clutching the folder of documents we'd spent nights assembling. "Melissa, what if he walks in here with some trick? Some lawyer ready to tear me apart? Then we bury them in evidence," I said, shutting off the truck. "Lawyers love clean paper trails, and we've got one that leads straight to Marcus's downfall." She nodded, but I saw her hands trembling as we walked inside. The conference room was all glass walls and stiff furniture, the kind of space designed to intimidate. Our attorney, a sharp woman named Denise Walker, sat at the head of the table with calm eyes and a legal pad. Joanne slid into the seat beside her, clutching my hand under the table like she was about to board an aircraft in turbulence. 10 minutes later, Marcus swaggered in, his grin stretched too wide, his eyes darting like he'd already had 2 cups of liquid courage. He tossed a manila envelope onto the table. Fraud, concealment, emotional distress. My lawyer says this'll stick. Denise raised an eyebrow, sliding the envelope open with 2 fingers. She scanned the first page, then set it down. "Mr. Miller, if this is what you intend to file, I suggest you consider your own exposure first." Marcus laughed, leaning back. "Exposure? She's the one who hid money from her husband." I leaned forward, voice flat. "You mean the inheritance her mother left her? The property she had every legal right to manage? Or are you talking about the cash you burned through while gambling online under 3 different usernames?" His grin twitched, but he didn't flinch. "You don't have proof." Denise tapped the box of documents on the table. "We have proof, Mr. Miller. Records of your termination at Axiom Tech for embezzlement, payday loan contracts signed in your name, bank transfers to third-party collectors, gambling receipts tied to your personal accounts, and, most importantly, voicemails from debt collectors threatening Joanne because of debts tied to you. If you want this to go to court, it won't be Joanne on trial, it'll be you." For the first time, the color drained from his face. He shifted in his chair, sweat beading at his temple. "You can't just dig up my private life like that. You did that yourself," I said coldly. "We just followed the trail." "When?" Joanne finally spoke, her voice shaking, but steady. "Marcus, you lied to me about everything. You made me think I was selfish, that I was ruining us. And all the while, you were burying us in debt. I'm done. This ends today." He slammed his fist on the table, making the pens jump. "You can't erase me. I'm your husband. Half of everything is mine." Denise didn't even blink. "Colorado courts don't grant half of inherited assets to spouses, Mr. Miller. And fraud voids most claims before they even start. If you want to argue this in front of a judge, I welcome the opportunity. But I promise, you won't like the discovery process." He leaned back, sneering at me. "This is your doing. You poisoned her against me." I met his glare head-on. "No, Marcus. You did that when you left her shivering at a gas station. You did that when you chose a poker app over your marriage. You did that when you let collectors threaten her safety. I'm just the one making sure you face it." His mouth opened, then shut again, like he'd run out of words to twist. He looked at Joanne, searching her face for weakness, but found nothing. She sat straighter now, hands folded over the folder, chin lifted like she'd finally remembered she had a spine. Denise folded her hands calmly. "Here's what we're offering. You sign the divorce papers today. You waive any claim to Joanne's inheritance. In exchange, she agrees not to pursue charges related to your debts, gambling, or workplace misconduct. You walk away clean. It's the best deal you're gonna get." Marcus barked a laugh, but it came out hollow. And if I don't? I leaned forward, lowering my voice until it was just above a whisper. Then we hand every document in this box to your creditors, your former employer, and the district attorney's office. And when the collectors come knocking, don't look at Joanne. Look in the mirror. The silence that followed stretched tight across the table. Marcus's hands twitched against the armrest. He glanced at the envelope he'd brought, then at the box of evidence, then back at Joanne. You'd really do it? He asked, his voice smaller now. Denise answered smoothly. She doesn't need to. I will. Joanne's lips pressed into a thin line. Sign the papers, Marcus, and get out of my life. End of quote. For a moment, I thought he might flip the table, storm out, make some last dramatic scene, but instead, he slumped back, shoulders sagging. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a man cornered by his own lies. Fine, he muttered. I'll sign. Denise slid the papers across the table with quiet efficiency. The pen scratched against the page, each stroke another nail in the coffin of his marriage. When he finished, he shoved the papers back with a scowl. This isn't over, he spat, glaring at Joanne. She met his eyes, steady now. Yes, Marcus, it island. I stood as he gathered his coat and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Joanne let out a shaky breath and leaned against me, her whole body trembling. Denise closed the folder calmly. It's not often we see someone like him fold without a fight. You both handled this well. I nodded, squeezing Joanne's shoulder. One battle down, but we'll keep watch. He's not the kind of man who stays quiet for long. Joanne lifted her head, her eyes clear despite the tears shining at the edges. But at least now I'm not afraid of him anymore. I smiled faintly. That's what victory feels like. Outside, the snow had stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds in sharp beams. Joanne stepped out of the office into the cold air, her breath visible, but her shoulders lighter. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and for the first time in months, she was walking forward without Marcus's shadow at her heels. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the heater. Joanne sat slouched in the passenger seat, the signed papers clutched in her lap like they might vanish if she let go. Her eyes were swollen, but her mouth was set, firm. When we pulled into her driveway, she didn't move right away. I killed the engine and waited. Finally, she let out a long, shaky breath. It's really over, isn't it? On paper, yeah, I said. But he'll need time to accept that reality. Men like Marcus don't handle losing well. She nodded slowly, staring at the house. At least it's my house again. Inside, the warmth of the fire greeted us. Joanne walked straight to the mantel, pulled down a framed wedding photo, and set it face down on the table. I don't ever want to see his smile again. I gave her space, dropping my bag on the couch. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the photo's back, then finally slid it into a box already half filled with reminders of him. She taped the lid shut with a final rip and pushed it aside. Her daughter, little Claire, came padding down the stairs then, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mom? You're home. Joanne scooped her up, hugging her so tight I thought the kid might squeak. Claire blinked at me over her mom's shoulder. Is the bad man gone? Joanne froze, then nodded. Yes, baby. He's gone. The girl buried her face in Joanne's neck. Good. I don't like when he yells. My chest tightened. Kids never miss the truth. Joanne looked at me over Claire's head, eyes wet. I nodded once. You both deserved better. Now you've got it. Later, after Claire was back in bed, Joanne and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea. She turned hers in slow circles, her hands steadier than before. Melissa, I don't know how to thank you. Without you, I would have folded. He would have taken everything. You don't thank family, I said. You just stand for them when it counts. She studied me for a long time, then asked softly, but what if he comes back? What if he tries something else? Then we deal with it, I said. You're not alone anymore, remember that. She nodded, eyes fixed on the rising steam. It feels strange, like I should feel free, but instead I just feel hollow, like a piece of me is missing. That's normal, I said gently. When you've been chained for years, sometimes the weight feels like part of you, but give it time. That hollow space, It'll fill back up with peace, with laughter, with things he could never give you. Her lips twitched into the faintest smile. You always did know how to sound like a drill sergeant and a therapist at the same time. I'll take that as a compliment. We sat in companionable silence for a while. The house creaked in the winter wind, but it didn't feel haunted anymore. The next morning, a locksmith arrived. We had every lock changed, every window checked, every security measure updated. Joanne watched as the last bolt clicked into place, relief visible in her shoulders. Feels like a clean slate, she murmured. That evening, we burned the last of Marcus's things in the fire pit out back. Clothes, letters, trinkets he'd left behind it all turned to ash under the night sky. Joanne stood beside me, arms crossed, her face lit orange by the flames. Feels like a funeral, she said. In a way it is, I replied. We're burying what he tried to make of you, what he tried to make of this family. She nodded, silent, watching the sparks rise. A week later, the divorce was finalized. The trust documents were drafted, putting her inheritance into a fund Marcus could never touch. Joanne met with Denise one last time, and when she walked out of that office, she looked taller, lighter. But the cost was visible too. Claire asked more questions at bedtime now. Joanne startled at sudden noises. And though she smiled more often, I could see the shadow in her eyes, the lingering memory of every slammed door and shouted threat. That night, sitting with her on the porch, she whispered, I feel like I lost years I'll never get back. You didn't lose them, I said. You survived them. And surviving is its own kind of victory. She leaned her head on my shoulder, silent for a long time. Finally, she murmured, I just hope Claire forgets the worst of it. She will, I assured her. Because what she'll remember is this: her mom standing strong, her mom fighting back. That's the story that sticks. Joanne exhaled, her breath clouding in the cold air. I couldn't have done it without you. I looked out at the quiet street, the snow glittering under the streetlights. That's what sisters are for. Marcus underestimated that, and that's why he lost. Odd. Inside, the house was warm again, filled with the quiet sounds of a child sleeping, the crackle of the fireplace, the faint hum of peace returning. Joanne walked past the empty mantel, where the wedding photo used to hang, and replaced it with a picture of Claire grinning in her school uniform. A better memory, a better anchor. The cost had been high, tears, fear, years of manipulation, but she'd bought her freedom, and now she was finally learning how to live with it. Snow melted into slush along the sidewalks as spring edged its way into the city. Joanne's house no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a home again. The locks were new, the walls freshly painted, and the quiet was no longer suffocating but steady. Claire's laughter filled the living room as she sprawled on the floor with colored pencils, sketching a sun with lopsided rays. Joanne sat at the kitchen table across from me. Papers spread out again, but these weren't debts or lawsuits. These were trust documents. The attorney says it's airtight, she explained, sliding the packet toward me. The money will be in a fund under Claire's name, with provisions for education and long-term care. The rest, she hesitated, then smiled faintly, will be donated to the Veterans Relief Foundation. I flipped through the pages, nodding. It's solid. Marcus can't touch it, not now, not ever. You've locked him out for good. Her shoulders sagged, the kind of release you don't get from one deep breath, but from months of grinding fear finally letting go. For years, I thought all I could do was protect the money from him. Now I get to use it for something good. Claire looked up from her drawing. What's a foundation? Joanne smiled. It's like a big savings account that helps people who need it, like soldiers who got hurt or families who lost someone. Oh. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than she let on, then went back to coloring. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. You're doing the right thing, Jo. It's not just about cutting him out. It's about building something stronger from what he tried to ruin. She glanced at me, eyes glassy. You always talk like you're giving orders on a mission. I smirked. Maybe I am. Mission accomplished. Protect the asset, neutralize the threat, secure the future. 1. Her laugh was small but genuine. You make it sound so simple. Simple doesn't mean easy, I reminded her. You fought harder than you realize. The news came a week later. I was pouring coffee when the TV caught my attention. A headline scrolled across the screen. Local man arrested in Las Vegas casino fraud sting. Marcus's mugshot flashed in grainy resolution, his once cocky grin replaced with the hollow-eyed glare of someone finally out of luck. Joanne walked in just in time to see it. She froze, one hand gripping the counter. "Melissa, is that—" "Yeah," I said flatly. "That's him." The anchor's voice droned on about gambling rings, fraudulent checks, unpaid debts. Marcus had been caught trying to pass fake chips at a blackjack table, surrounded by cameras and men in suits who weren't impressed. Joanne sank into a chair, staring at the screen. He really couldn't stop, could he? "No," I said, setting the coffee pot down. "Men like him never stop. They just crash. A body." She covered her mouth, a mix of shock and bitter relief crossing her face. Part of me feels sad, I guess, that he wasted everything. I sat across from her, voice even. Don't confuse pity with forgiveness. Feeling sorry for him doesn't mean you owe him anything. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching. "Do you think he'll ever change?" I shook my head. Prisons are full of men who swore they'd change. Marcus's problem isn't bad luck. It's who he islanded and who he has finally caught up with him. When? She looked back at the screen as the segment ended, the anchor moving on to weather. Joanne exhaled, shoulders trembling. "It's over, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "Now it really island." That night, she pulled out a small box from the closet. Inside were mementos, letters, photos, little tokens she hadn't been able to part with before. Without a word, she carried it to the fire pit in the backyard. Claire stood by her side, clutching her hand. Together, they tipped the box into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. Joanne stood tall, her daughter's hand in hers, watching every trace of Marcus burn away. I stood a few feet back, arms crossed, letting them own the moment. This wasn't my battle to finish, it was hers. And watching her face, calm and unflinching in the glow of the fire, I knew she'd finally found her closure. Later, when the fire died down, she joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. Claire had gone to bed, her laughter still echoing faintly through the house. Joanne sipped slowly, then said, "You know, I used to think strength was pretending everything was fine, smiling when I wanted to scream. Now I get it. Strength is saying enough, and walking away." I raised my mug in a mock toast. "Took you long enough." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. The night stretched quiet around us, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel heavy but earned. I thought back to the desert, to the faces of men I'd lost, to the way betrayal had carved holes in me I thought would never heal. And then I looked at Joanne, alive, free, sitting in the soft glow of her rebuilt life. "Jo," I said, my voice low, "I made a promise once. Overseas, when everything went sideways, I swore I'd never let betrayal take someone I loved again. That's why I fought so hard for you. Because this—" I gestured toward the house, toward the laughter still lingering in its walls. "This is worth fighting for." Her eyes shone in the dim light. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Then I promise too, to never let anyone take this from me again." The wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the fire pit, the ashes of Marcus's last grip on her life drifting into the night. We sat there together, sisters bound not just by blood but by battle, sipping tea as if the world had finally stopped spinning so violently. And for the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel like a dream. It felt like home. Looking back on everything, it strikes me how battles don't always happen on foreign soil or in uniform. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones waged inside your own family, in kitchens and courtrooms, against people who were supposed to love you. Marcus thought he could win by fear, by twisting Joanne's trust, by drowning her in debt, by turning her own life into a weapon against her. But fear only works when no one stands up to it. Joanne found her strength again, and she didn't find it by pretending she wasn't hurt. She found it by saying, "Enough," by burning the lies, changing the locks, and protecting what was hers and her daughter's future. She learned that revenge isn't about screaming louder or hitting harder. It's about outlasting, outsmarting, and taking back control so completely that the other side can't touch you anymore. For me, it was a reminder of why I put on the uniform in the first place. Discipline, vigilance, loyalty, those weren't just lessons for war zones. They were the same principles that pulled Joanne out of the shadows Marcus had shoved her into. Family deserves that same kind of defense. And sometimes, it takes the sharpness of a soldier to protect what matters most at home. In the end, Marcus lost not because we shouted him down, but because he couldn't live with the truth catching up to him. Joanne didn't just survive him, she built something stronger in his place. That's the victory. The battlefield changes, the enemies change, but the mission never does. Protect the ones you love, fight for the truth, and never ever let betrayal be the final word.